At 10:04 a.m., my phone rang with news that froze my blood. Police had found my missing grandson. The problem? My grandson was asleep in the next room. 7 years of grief, secrets, and family lies were about to collide, revealing a truth no grandfather could ever prepare for. Mr. Bennett, this is Officer Morales, with the Red Creek County Sheriff's Office. We found your grandson, Ethan Bennett. He's safe. He's here at the station. I sat upright so quickly that the room spun. That's impossible, I whispered. Ethan is asleep upstairs. There was silence. Sir, we have a 7-year-old boy here, brown hair, small burn mark on his left forearm. He says his name is Ethan Bennett. My heart began pounding. I rushed down the hallway and pushed open Ethan's bedroom door. He was there, curled beneath his blue space blanket, one sock missing, exactly as he had fallen asleep the night before. His chest rose and fell peacefully. Officer, I said, gripping the phone. I'm looking at him right now. Another pause. Then you need to come here immediately, Morales said. Because the boy sitting in front of me has your grandson's face. I couldn't speak. I grabbed my keys. My name is Thomas Bennett. I'm 59 years old, and until that morning, I believed I understood every important chapter of my family's history. I had spent 3 decades repairing engines at a garage outside the small Pennsylvania town of Millhaven. My wife, Susan, had died from cancer 5 years earlier. 2 years after that, my daughter Rachel died from an accidental overdose. Rachel was 32. She left behind Ethan, who was 5 when she died. His biological father, Marcus Reed, had disappeared from their lives long before Rachel passed. He called occasionally, promised visits, and always found another reason not to show. So I became Ethan's father in everything except paperwork. I packed his lunches, attended school meetings, learned which cartoons he hated, and discovered that he couldn't sleep unless his bedroom door was completely closed. After Rachel died, Ethan stopped calling me Grandpa. One evening, while sitting at the kitchen table, he spilled his milk and looked at me nervously. Dad, I'm sorry. I froze. Then I wiped the table. It's okay, buddy. Accidents happen. Neither of us ever discussed it again. But from that night forward, I was Dad. That was why the officer's call made no sense. Ethan had never disappeared. He had never even spent a night away from me without my knowledge. Yet 40 minutes away, another little boy was sitting in a police station, carrying the same name and apparently the same face. At 12:47 a.m., I drove Ethan to Red Creek County. He slept in the back seat beneath the same blanket, unaware that my entire understanding of his life was collapsing. When we arrived, Officer Morales met us at the entrance. His expression changed the moment he saw Ethan. He stared at my grandson, then he looked toward the waiting room. Mr. Bennett, he said quietly, you need to see this. I followed him inside. And there, beneath a fluorescent light, sat a frightened little boy. He looked exactly like Ethan. Not similar, not related looking. Exactly like him. Ethan woke against my shoulder. He stared across the room. Then he whispered the words that made my blood run cold. Dad, why does that kid look like me? Officer Morales closed the waiting room door behind us and lowered his voice. We found him walking alone beside State Route 17 shortly after midnight, he said. He had no identification, no backpack, and no adult with him. When we asked his name, he said Caleb Bennett. I looked at the boy, Caleb. He was thinner than Ethan, his hair uneven, as though someone had cut it with kitchen scissors. His oversized sneakers were tied in tight double knots. A paper cup of cocoa trembled between his hands. Where are your parents? I asked gently. He stared at the floor. I don't know. Morales pulled a chair beside me. His fingerprints triggered an old missing child report. 11 months ago, a 7-year-old named Ethan Bennett was reported missing from neighboring Denton County. My stomach tightened. I never reported Ethan missing. I know. Then who did? Morales turned his laptop toward me. A name appeared on the screen. Margaret Reed, Marcus's mother. My former daughter-in-law. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. That has to be wrong. I thought so too, Morales replied. So I checked the original records. He opened another file, 7 years earlier. On the same day Rachel had given birth, a second birth had been recorded at a private maternity clinic almost 50 miles away. 2 male infants, born within minutes of each other. Same mother, same father, twins. My hands went numb. Rachel had 1 baby, I said. Morales shook his head. According to these records, she had 2. I remembered the day Ethan was born. Rachel had been exhausted, frightened, and unusually quiet. Marcus had barely spoken. Margaret had arrived at the hospital and immediately taken Marcus into the hallway for a private conversation. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now that memory felt like a warning I had somehow missed. Where was the second baby taken? I asked. Morales hesitated. That's where things become complicated. The paperwork showed that the second child had been placed under the guardianship of Margaret Reed. There was no normal adoption order, no proper court hearing, no clear evidence that Rachel had knowingly surrendered her child, just a private agreement prepared by an attorney. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood. She stole my grandson. Morales didn't correct me. Before he could say anything else, Caleb looked up. His eyes met mine. Is Ethan my brother? The question destroyed whatever anger I had been holding together. I crouched beside him. Yes, I whispered. I think he is. Caleb looked toward Ethan. Ethan stepped closer. For the first time, the boys stood only a few feet apart. Neither spoke. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic dinosaur. I have another one at home, he said. Caleb frowned. So do I. What color? Green. Ethan smiled. Mine too. Officer Morales looked at me. There's one person who can explain this. Margaret arrived before sunrise. She looked older than I remembered, wrapped in a gray coat and clutching her purse with both hands. The moment she entered the room and saw the boys together, her face collapsed. She didn't deny anything. I was trying to protect them, she whispered. My voice shook. Protect them from what? She looked at Caleb. From each other. I felt something inside me break. Margaret sat down, and finally, after 7 years of silence, she began telling us the truth. Margaret kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Rachel and Marcus were already struggling before the twins were born, she said. Marcus was drinking. They were behind on rent. Rachel was exhausted and terrified about raising 2 babies. I stared at her. You're telling me she agreed to this? No. The single word landed harder than anything else. Margaret continued. When the doctor told us there were twins, Marcus panicked. He said they couldn't afford 2 children. I convinced him that separating them temporarily would give everyone time to recover. Temporarily? She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I promised I would tell Rachel, but you didn't. No. Why? Margaret finally looked at me. Because once the babies were separated, every year made the truth harder to explain. I felt my fists tighten. You stole one of her children. I know. You let me believe Rachel had only 1 son. I know. And you watched me raise Ethan while another child was growing up less than an hour away. She covered her face. I know. Her answers made me angrier than an argument would have. Then she explained how the secret had survived. She had taken Caleb through an unofficial guardianship arrangement arranged by a lawyer she trusted. The paperwork was designed to look legitimate, but several signatures and approvals had never been properly completed. Marcus knew. He had known from the beginning, and he had done nothing. Why? I asked. Margaret gave a bitter laugh. He was afraid. Of what? Of losing everything. His job, his reputation, his parents. He kept saying he'd tell Rachel when things improved, but Rachel died. Margaret nodded, and after she died, there was no one left to tell. I looked toward Caleb. He was sitting quietly beside Ethan. Neither boy seemed interested in the adults anymore. They were comparing toys. 2 brothers who had lost 7 years because grown-ups had been too frightened to tell the truth. How did Caleb find out? I asked. Margaret swallowed. I mentioned Ethan during an argument. I didn't realize he was listening. Caleb looked down. I heard her say there was another boy, he whispered. Everyone became silent. I asked who he was, Caleb continued. She said it didn't matter. His little fingers tightened around the dinosaur. But I wanted to know why I didn't have a family like other kids. My anger suddenly gave way to something heavier. Caleb had spent 7 years believing something was wrong with him. 2 nights earlier, after another argument, he had packed nothing and walked away. I wanted to find my brother, he said. Ethan moved closer. You found me. Caleb nodded. Yes. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Officer Morales entered with another man. Marcus, Rachel's former husband, stopped when he saw the twins. His face went pale. I stood. You knew. Marcus looked at the floor. Yes. The word echoed through the room. You knew for 7 years. Yes. And you never told me. He shook his head. I was scared. I laughed bitterly. That's your excuse. I didn't know how to fix it. You had 7 years. Marcus began crying. I thought keeping quiet was protecting everyone. No, I said. Keeping quiet protected you. He didn't answer. That was the truth. The legal questions came quickly afterward. Who had custody of Caleb? Was Margaret's guardianship valid? Had Rachel ever knowingly surrendered her son? Could Marcus be held responsible for participating in an illegal placement? Nobody had simple answers. But one thing was obvious. Caleb needed somewhere safe to go. That night, Ethan reached across the table and took his brother's hand. Do you want to come home with us? Caleb looked at me. I nodded. If the court allows it, I said. You can. He hesitated. Will I have my own bed? I smiled through the tears. You'll have a bedroom. And food? I understood immediately why he asked. Yes, I said. Always. For the first time, Caleb smiled. And in that tiny police station, surrounded by paperwork, accusations, and 7 years of lies, I realized something. I had arrived believing I was going to find out why another boy looked like my grandson. Instead, I had discovered that he wasn't another boy, he was my grandson too. The weeks that followed were harder than anything I had expected. The police investigation continued. Lawyers reviewed old documents. Medical records were requested. A judge ordered DNA testing, although nobody in our family needed the results to understand what had happened. The test confirmed it. Caleb was Ethan's identical twin. He was Rachel's son. He was my grandson. And somehow, for 7 years, nobody had been allowed to tell him. The court eventually reviewed Margaret's guardianship agreement and found serious problems with the original placement. Several required documents were missing, and Rachel's consent had never been properly established. Margaret had made a terrible decision. Marcus had allowed it to happen. But the person who had paid the highest price was Caleb. The judge granted me temporary custody while the investigation continued. That first evening, I brought both boys home. Ethan ran upstairs immediately. "This room is mine," he shouted. Then he stopped. He looked at Caleb. "You can have the other one." Caleb stood in the hallway, uncertain. "Really? Yeah, it's next to mine." He smiled. That night, I prepared 2 plates of spaghetti. Ethan ate normally. Caleb ate quickly, far too quickly. He kept looking toward the kitchen, as though someone might suddenly take his plate away. When dinner ended, he quietly slipped 2 bread rolls into his pocket. I pretended not to notice. The next morning, I found crackers beneath his pillow, then an apple inside his dresser, then granola bars hidden beneath a blanket. He had learned to save food because he didn't trust that there would always be something to eat. I never confronted him. Instead, I filled the pantry. I placed fruit on the counter. I kept snacks in a drawer he could reach whenever he wanted. Eventually, he stopped hiding food. Small changes came slowly. The first time Caleb laughed loudly, I froze. It sounded like Rachel. Not exactly, but close enough that I had to turn away for a moment. I had spent 2 years believing I would never hear that laugh again. Now it was coming from the hallway. One evening, Caleb stood in the kitchen while Ethan called me Dad. He watched quietly. Then he asked, "Can I call you that?" I looked at him. "You can call me anything that feels right." He swallowed. "Dad?" My eyes filled with tears. "Yeah, buddy." He smiled. "Okay, Dad." I hugged him. For the first time, he hugged me back without hesitation. Margaret began counseling and was eventually allowed supervised visits with the boys. I didn't forgive her quickly. Some wounds don't disappear because someone says they're sorry. But I stopped asking myself what punishment could possibly give us back the years she had taken. Nothing could. Marcus visited occasionally. The boys were polite but cautious around him. I never told them what to think about their father. They would decide that for themselves when they were old enough. As for me, I learned that raising 2 children wasn't simply twice the work. It was twice the responsibility, twice the noise, twice the laundry, and somehow twice the joy. The boys fought over video games. They argued about whose turn it was to choose the television show. They competed over who could finish homework first. And then, 5 minutes later, they would be sitting shoulder to shoulder, sharing the same bowl of popcorn. One Saturday, they found an old photograph of Rachel. Both boys stared at it. "Mom," Ethan whispered. Caleb touched the picture carefully. "She was my mom too?" I swallowed hard. "Yes." He looked at me. Did she love me? That question nearly destroyed me. I pulled him close. "She would have loved you more than anything." I couldn't prove it, but I knew my daughter, and I believed it with every part of me. Months passed. The court eventually made my custody of Caleb permanent. The brothers remained together, and slowly, our strange new family became normal. Not the family I had imagined. Something better. Something built from truth instead of secrets. One night, I checked on the boys before bed. They were sleeping in separate rooms. I stood between their doors, listening to their breathing. For 7 years, I had checked on one grandson. Now I checked on 2. And every night, I silently thanked Rachel for leaving me something I hadn't known I had lost. A year after that terrifying phone call, the house sounded completely different. There were 2 backpacks by the front door, 2 pairs of muddy sneakers beneath the bench, and twice as many complaints about whose turn it was to take out the trash. I wouldn't trade any of it. Ethan and Caleb were 8 now. People sometimes struggled to tell them apart. I didn't. Ethan tilted his head when he was thinking. Caleb rubbed his thumb against his palm when he was nervous. Ethan hated peas. Caleb secretly loved them. They looked identical, but they were becoming 2 completely different people, and I was grateful for every difference. The boys had also developed their own language. If one wanted something, the other usually knew before he asked. If Ethan got nervous at school, Caleb somehow sensed it. If Caleb had a nightmare, Ethan would quietly walk into his room and sit beside him until he fell asleep. They were making up for 7 lost years without even realizing it. One afternoon, their teacher called me. "Mr. Bennett, I wanted to tell you something." I immediately worried that they had gotten into trouble. Instead, she laughed. The boys submitted the same science project. I sighed. What did they build? A cardboard house. I waited. Apparently, she continued, they said every family needs a place where nobody can be separated. I had to sit down. That sentence stayed with me for days. Because children don't understand complicated legal language. They don't understand fraudulent guardianship agreements or missing signatures. They understand belonging. They understand who comes when they're scared. They understand who waits outside their bedroom. They understand home. Margaret still visited under supervision. Our relationship never returned to what it had been before the truth came out. Maybe it never should. But one afternoon, she brought the boys a box of old photographs. Inside was a picture of Rachel while pregnant. She was smiling, one hand resting on her stomach. There were 2 names written on the back. Ethan, Caleb. I stared at those names for a long time. Rachel had known, at least she had known, there were 2 babies. Maybe she had planned to tell me. Maybe she had intended to fight. I'll never know. But seeing those names written in her handwriting gave me something I hadn't had since her death. Proof that Caleb had never been forgotten by his mother. He had been hidden. There was a difference. That evening, I showed the photograph to both boys. Caleb touched his mother's face. She knew my name? Yes, he smiled. Then she knew me. I nodded. She knew you. He leaned against my shoulder. I wish I could remember her. So do I. He was quiet for a moment. Then Ethan walked over and wrapped an arm around him. You have me. Caleb smiled. Yeah, and Dad. I laughed. Don't forget Dad. They both hugged me. That night, after the boys went to sleep, I stood in the hallway. 2 bedroom doors. 2 identical faces behind them. 2 lives that had somehow found their way back together. I thought about that phone call at 10:04 a.m. I thought about the words that had terrified me. We found your grandson. The officer had been right. They had found my grandson. They had simply found one I never knew I had. For years, I believed grief meant losing someone and learning to live with the empty space they left behind. I understand it differently now. Sometimes grief leaves a door open. Sometimes, years later, something unexpected walks through it. Not to erase the person you lost, but to remind you that love can survive even the worst mistakes people make. Rachel lost her life too young, but her sons survived. They found each other, and they found me. Every night, I still check their rooms before going to bed. I stand in the doorway and watch them breathe. 2 boys, 2 brothers, 1 family. And whenever they call me Dad, I hear something in their voices that tells me the years we lost will never be returned. But the years ahead, those belong to us. And this time, nobody gets to take them away.